In just 2 months, we took a professional services client from 4 leads to 77 leads without increasing their budget for ad spend. Today, I'm going to break down exactly what changes we made so you can implement those changes for your own Google Ads campaign. Before we make any changes to the Google Ads campaign, we firstly need to find the right balance in our keyword research between keywords that are very specific and keywords that are cost effective. Here's the problem. Many people will have you believe that you need to go after longer tail keywords that are more specific, as they tend to be higher in intent and they tend to have a lower CPC, but that's not always the case. And I tend to agree with this for the most part. However, it's easy to fall into the trap of going hyper specific. For example, the client that we're working with at the moment was previously bidding on solicitors' fees for lasting power of attorney. Now, it's easy to see the two differences with these two keywords. One is super specific, and when we actually looked at the data, there was very limited search volume. And the other keyword is still longer tail, but it's just not as hyper specific. Now, while these ultra specific keywords will tend to have lower competition, in some cases they can actually have a drastically higher CPC. This means if you have a small to medium sized budget like the client we were working with, it can get eaten up very quickly with very few clicks, and it means you have to have a really high conversion rate in order to offset that CPC cost. Here's what to do instead. Firstly, try and look for keywords which are in the middle of being really specific and super generic. And when you have that list of keywords, you then want to prioritize them by their search intent relevant to the services that you're offering. But we also want to make sure there's low enough CPCs where we're not going to be breaking the bank for each conversion. Now, this will change depending on your service type. Some businesses will of course have a very high contract value, in which case you can probably afford for a more expensive click. Whereas if you have, a small to medium size contract value, you're going to have to be a bit more intelligent with the CPCs that you're choosing. Just a note on that second point, you can use tools like SEMrush to measure intent if you're struggling to do that yourselves. It automatically will show you if a keyword is transactional, commercial, or informational. However, it's not always 100% accurate, so do be careful. Another way you can also think about this is if a keyword is mentioning a service type or is pre-modified with a location or is pre-modified with buy or book inquiry or something along those lines where they're making clear their intent within the phrase, that will often signal that that's a high intent keyword without you having to jump into the semantics. Finally, when we have that keyword list which has been prioritized by intent, we can then start adding these keywords as exact match or phrase match into our campaigns. We want to test these over a period of time, and then we can iterate after that point. So if we see keywords or certain phrases which aren't performing well, we can include these as negative phrases so Google doesn't bid on them anymore. We can completely remove parts of the campaign or some keywords from the campaign if they're not performing, and then we can put more budget into some of those keywords that are performing. Now, I want to give some context as to why this method works, as I see there's a lot of confusion in relation to the way that auctions work on platforms like Google Ads. Now, you probably heard me earlier say that a keyword can still be higher in CPC even though it has less competition. So let me provide you with an example to make this super clear, and it's all to do with supply and demand. So let's take a generic keyword over here. It has 5,000 search volume and there's 5 competitors bidding for that keyword in the auction. Let's take another keyword and it's much longer tail, but it only has 100 search volume and there's only 2 people competing for it. Now, which keyword do you think is going to have the higher CPC? Well, it's going to be that longer tail keyword because there's less impressions to go around. So although there's only 2 competitors, there's only 50 impressions for each of those competitors. So when you implement this strategy, what you're probably going to notice is that your conversion rates are going to go down a touch, but they're still going to remain relatively stable. But the main thing that you're going to notice is that your CPCs are going to reduce significantly, which will give you more clicks. So it's going to offset that slight reduction that you have with your conversion rate. This was the first thing we did with this client. It became evident to us within the ad account they were going too specific with those keywords. So we found that right balance. We redid that keyword research and we prioritized by intent and CPC, and lo and behold, we started seeing a massive boost in results pretty much immediately from making these changes. The second step is consolidating your campaign structure to give Google's algorithm more to work with. A big issue we constantly see is people have so many different fragmented campaigns for each microservice that they offer. So they're trying to split everything out into too much detail. And that means that the budget spreads too thinly across the account. While this seems logical for organizations reporting and even efficiency, it creates a huge problem with the algorithm. When your data is spread thinly across the account into multiple smaller campaigns, it gives the algorithm less signals to work with. So it's much more difficult for it to make data-driven decisions. So let's take a silly real-world example to explain this. So there's two people looking for cars. One person decides to test drive 2 cars. The other person decides to test drive 5 cars. Who do you think is going to make the best decision in relation to cost, efficiency, and quality of car? It's more likely going to be the person that's test drove 4 cars rather than the person that's test drove 2 cars. Now, that's not to say that the person that test drive 2 cars didn't get really lucky and they chose the perfect car from that choice. But it's the law of averages, right? If I've got a bigger sample size, I've got more data, I've got more chance of making the correct decision. So when none of your campaigns have enough data, it slows down that learning phase dramatically, and it means that you're delayed in your decision making as you can't be sure in an efficient time manner as to whether something is performing or whether something isn't. But on the other hand, we also don't want to chuck everything into one giant campaign because that will also result in inefficient ad spend. So what I'm going to do is give you our recommendation for, a medium-sized budget, but I'm also going to tell you what we did for this particular campaign, as it was a slightly more unique scenario just due to their lower budget. So we'll start with our recommendation. You should combine all your service campaigns per service. So if you're a lawyer, for instance, and you have conveyancing, there should be one campaign for conveyancing, there should be one campaign for divorce law, contract law, etc., etc. Then one brand protection campaign. Now, if you're a relatively new or small business and you're not too concerned about your branded traffic, then don't worry too much about that. One competitor campaign, so competing on other lawyers in this instance for the example I gave, so competing on their brand terms, which can also give you some quick wins and still some of their market share. And finally, one evergreen campaign, which is the tried and tested terms for that service. So if it was solicitors, we'd literally bid on solicitors or divorce solicitors, that kind of thing. So the reason this is optimal for a medium budget is because we have enough budget to allocate to each of those service types, but we also have enough control over the campaign. But it will be a different scenario if you have a much smaller budget. If you fall into that category, what I would recommend doing is keeping the same structure, but combining all your service types into one campaign. As you implement these changes, the next steps you want to take is ensure you've got a good monitoring system set up so you can make the correct decisions when that data starts to come in. This will ensure you're not just generating more leads, but you're generating qualified leads. Because remember, we could have a really successful campaign which is generating tons and tons of leads, but if they're not converting into revenue, then they're obviously pretty much useless. But now you're probably asking, how can I ensure I effectively monitor the quality of these leads so I can make those preemptive decisions? Here's the step-by-step process that we use at Fueled. Now, feel free to track these any way you like. We tend to use a spreadsheet as it's super simple and it's completely free. And what we're going to do here is we're just going to list all the details from each one of those leads that comes from the Google Ads campaigns and give them a score of 1 to 5 after that inquiry has been taken. So naturally, we're going to be obviously monitoring the quantity as we're going to be adding the leads as we go, and then we can count up the leads. And then we're going to be applying that score. So we can see if quantity is outweighing quality or quality is outweighing quantity. Now, of course, if you only have 2 leads and they're super high quality, that's not enough leads. But if you have a really high quantity, but the quality is really low, then of course that's not going to help either. So we need to try and strike a balance there. But ideally, we have a really high quantity and a really high quality, but naturally that's going to be difficult to achieve with a minimal or small budget. Secondly, you want to regularly monitor your conversion rates to ensure that they're converting. This is relatively self-explanatory here, but of course you just want to see if there's any drop off, and if there is a drop off, you want to take action on that immediately and find out, is it something to do with the website? Do we have clear enough call to actions, or is is this keyword just dropping off in terms of its performance? Thirdly, review the distribution between leads in your different services. Now, of course, if you have one service, don't worry about this step, but this will allow you to see if there's one service type that is performing over another service type, and if we need to adjust budgets accordingly. It might be that you just want to focus on one service as that's clearly performing better through a platform like Google, or it might be that we need to adjust the strategy for that service type that isn't performing so well. And finally, make incremental adjustments as we go along. Now, with all our clients, we make subtle changes on a weekly basis. This is probably overkill for most people. You don't need to do that, but of course, we're a marketing agency and this is what we specialize in. Like I said earlier in the video, each scenario for an individual business will be different. We've actually had clients in the exact same niche, which offer very similar service types, and one of them has significantly better performance on one service type over another business just because they have more testimonials, they might have more reviews, and these are these little subtle factors which will mean that you'll need to make those adjustments accordingly. By implementing this methodology, we've seen some professional service businesses completely transform their PPC performance, some achieving up to 7x leads, and some even in the second month achieving up to 18x, as with this client that I spoke about in today's video. And this was all without increasing their ad budget. Now, if you want us to do the same for you by analyzing your account, showing you where the opportunities are, and implementing the strategy for you, you can book a call down in the link in the description. We'll show you exactly how to implement these changes for your specific situation. We're just starting our YouTube channel and we're very small at the moment. So if you did find some value from this video, please like and subscribe, or if you thought everything I said was trash, please dislike the video. Thank you for listening, and I will catch you in the next one.